Welcome back. In this video, we're going to discuss how the amendments attempt to balance individual liberty with public safety and order. Let's do it. So by now, I think you've seen the idea that the AP test wants to look at this debate, right, between freedom and liberty on the one hand, safety, security, and order on the other hand. We know that if we had policies that were all on one side or the other, that might not be desirable. So we could go to the extreme of having 100% liberty, but we'd have no security, no order, and probably most people wouldn't like that. Most people probably wouldn't like the other extreme either, right? To go to the extreme of having no liberty, no freedom, 100% police state. So there's a balance here. And the idea is that this is essentially on a spectrum, and we're trying to get the balance right. So we want to maximize freedom, but at the same time, we want to maintain safety and order. So how exactly do we do that? So we're going to consider in this video how that debate has taken place with the Second, the Fourth, and the Eighth Amendment. So we're going to start with the Eighth Amendment. So the Eighth Amendment says that there will be no cruel or unusual punishment. Now the obvious question we have today in that regard is, well, what about the death penalty? Is the death penalty cruel and unusual punishment? So did you know that the Supreme Court actually stopped the death penalty in the United States for a while? In a 1972 case, the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was being arbitrarily and unevenly applied, especially when it comes to race. And so what they said was that black defendants were much more likely to be getting the death penalty than white defendants. So the Supreme Court stopped the death penalty and said to the states, essentially, you guys need to come up with some kind of objective standard of how people get the death penalty and not just leave this up to juries to be racist and give the death penalty to whomever they want and not give it to other people. So 4 years later, we get the death penalty back. So the Supreme Court reinstitutes the death penalty, but they do add something new, which is that there cannot be any automatic or mandatory death penalty for a certain crime. Now, again, there have been other changes throughout time regarding the death penalty. More modern updates to it include the fact that intellectually disabled persons or people with an IQ of 70 or less, they cannot receive the death penalty. Additionally, a person cannot receive the death penalty for a crime that he or she committed when they were a minor or under the age of 18. And most recently, in 2008, the Supreme Court ruled that a person cannot receive the death penalty for any crime besides murder, including rape. So we can see that there have been limitations on use of the death penalty in the United States from the Supreme Court, but as of today, it is not viewed as violating that Eighth Amendment and that protection against cruel or unusual punishment. Now, there are also important debates that we can have about the Fourth Amendment. Again, that balancing that liberty on one hand versus security and order. And one of the things that the College Board has mentioned several times is this idea about collection of digital metadata. So if we consider something like the Patriot Act or the USA Freedom Act, what these did was they allowed law enforcement services to have access to this kind of wiretapping or to this sort of metadata, this digital information that could be tracking your location, for instance, your online communications, all these sorts of things. And the argument on the security side is obviously, well, we need to do this so that we can be safe, to prevent terrorism is typically the argument in favor of the Freedom and Patriot Act. So this is about protecting people, and if you're not a terrorist, then you don't have anything to worry about. On the other side of that argument are civil libertarians. These are people who protect and defend the civil liberties found in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. And they would argue that these searches are drastically unreasonable, that they target certain groups, and so there is this stereotyping and profiling that takes place where certain people are much more likely to be targeted for these data searches than other people, and that these are clear violations of our rights. Another argument that is familiar to us that we can think about again in this context is the gun control versus gun rights argument. So as we established in the previous video, the Supreme Court says that you do have an individual right to bear arms. It does not have to be connection to any kind of militia service. That's all well and good. The question is, all right, well, what about limitations on that right to bear arms? Can certain types of weapons be banned? Can they be really restricted? What about certain types of ammunition? or certain types of things that a person might add on to their rifle to make it maybe quieter or to be able to shoot more rapidly, what have you. Can governments make restrictions on those sorts of things, or does that violate a person's Second Amendment rights? So this idea of gun control on the one hand, wanting to restrict those rights, why do they want to do that? Well, they'd be making the argument in favor of safety and security, saying that having all these guns, that makes us more at risk and it makes us less safe. The gun rights side, they're going to be arguing the liberty side of this equation, arguing that an individual has this right to bear arms, so the government should not be stepping on that and trampling their rights. So again, these are tough questions. These are probably things that could come up in the argument essay. So we want to understand what the constitutional arguments would be for each side and how those could relate to some of your required documents. So until next time, this has been a La Money production. All right, thanks again for watching. Hit that like button for me, subscribe, and let me know what you think down in the comments below. Should we be more worried about liberty and freedom or more worried about security? Let me know what you guys think.